Hello Greenstylers, Cynthia here with a sewing tutorial for the Greenstyle mini flare leggings. The mini flares come in both adult and youth sizing, with petite, standard, and tall files included for the adult pattern. The pattern also includes an optional gusset and 2 waistband options. The mini flare begins to flare out below the knee, which is different from our original flare leggings, which begins at the thigh. To make your mini flares, you'll need from 1 to 1.5 yards of bottom weight performance fabrics with 50 to 75% stretch. And here are the pieces that you'll need to cut. Cut 2 of piece P1, the back piece. If you're using the gusset, make sure to cut along the dotted gusset cut line and mark the bottom mark for the gusset placement. In addition, there are notches along the outer leg seam for matching. There's also a knee placement line that should cross over the center of your kneecap. That will help you perfect your fit. Cut 2 of piece P to the front piece. Again, if you're using the gusset, cut along the dotted gusset cut line, marking the end of the gusset placement. Also mark the notches on the outer leg seam, and again, if you're working on fit, mark those knee placement lines. If using the optional gusset, cut 1 P3, the optional gusset piece. Cut on the fold or as a single piece for projector users, marking the center line. If you've selected the standard waistband option, cut 1 of piece C1, the front outer waistband. Cut 1 of piece C3, the back outer waistband, marking the bottom center notches. If using self fabric for the inner waistband, you may find it useful to mark the pattern pieces on the inside for quick and easy reference during construction. For the standard waistband option, you'll also need to cut pieces C2, the front inner waistband, and C4, the back inner waistband. Again, marking the pattern pieces can be useful if you're using the same fabric for the inner and outer waistbands. If you've selected the folded waistband option, you'll need to cut 1 of piece C5, the folded front waistband, and 1 of piece C6, the folded back waistband. If not using the gusset, skip to step 2. If you are making the optional gusset, make sure you've trimmed the inner leg seam as indicated on the pattern pieces and mark the notch as well. With right sides together, pin or clip the 2 back P1 pieces together at the center back seam and do the same for the 2 front P2 pieces. Stitch using a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. To attach the gusset, we'll begin by laying our back pieces with right side facing up on the table and bring over the gusset. Find the center back seam and the 2 gusset notches. We're going to pin in place at the center back seam and then pin from the center to each end of the gusset. The ends of the gusset will align with the notches. Pin or clip along the entire gusset, matching raw edges with the back pieces. Stitch using a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. When using a sewing machine, you can begin stitching right at the edge of the gusset, but when using a serger, you'll want to serge on a little bit before the gusset in order to be at a 3/8 inch seam allowance once you reach the gusset. Continue down the length of the gusset, stitching at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once you reach the end of the gusset, be sure to stitch off the end of the gusset while maintaining a 3/8 inch seam allowance and then stitch off of your fabric. Here's how your gusset will look once it's stitched on. At this point, you will fold the gusset away from the main fabric, just like so. For a neat inner finish, you will want the seam of the gusset to point away from the gusset and toward the main pant piece. You can top stitch in place just right here on the other side of the seam from the gusset, making sure that you only top stitch to the end of the gusset. With your back piece and gusset laying right side up on the table, bring over the front piece, lining up the inner leg seams. Pin the center seam to the center of the gusset, and then line up the notches on the front pieces with the ends of the gusset, pinning them in place. Finish pinning the remainder of the gusset to the front pieces. Then once past the gusset, we'll continue by pinning or clipping the inner leg seams together. If using the gusset, you may have noticed a funny little transition from where you're pinning clipping the raw edge of the gusset to pinning clipping the raw edge of the back piece. I'll share two options when pinning or clipping this section, the first being to simply create a tiny twist so that the raw edge of the back pant leg meets the raw edge of the front pant leg. As you stitch, you'll want to work carefully to make sure that that raw edge is folded down. Follow the stitch line as indicated in red here as it crosses over from the gusset to the pant leg. Your other option, and this is the way that I will normally attach gussets, would be to create a tiny snip in the fabric along the raw edge of that back pant leg right at the edge of the gusset. And here is where I've made a tiny little snip. You want to make sure that your snip is within the seam allowance and as close to the gusset as possible. This will allow the raw edge of the back piece to lay flat up against the raw edge of the front piece without involving a little twist, helping to create a little bit neater of a seam. Use a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance to stitch the entire inner leg seam from hemline to hemline. And here's how your gusset should look after it's all stitched. We'll take a look at the side first with the twist. And here is that inner section. Make sure to check the outside of your pant leg to make sure everything is enclosed and there aren't any holes at the tip of the gusset. And here's how the side with the snip will look. It's a little bit flatter and also fully stitched. Here is the second stitch line that we've just done that crossed over the original one. Make sure to check the front. See that your gusset is fully stitched and that there are no holes again at the tip. Optionally, you can top stitch the other side of the gusset at this time to make a nice flat finish on the inside, just like the first one. With right sides together, pin or clip the side seams, matching notches and raw edges. Stitch using a stretch stitch or serger in a 3/8 inch seam allowance. For the standard waistband option, bring over the back outer and front outer pieces, C3 and C1. Place them with right sides together and pin or clip along the short side seams. Repeat for the back inner and front inner pieces C4 and C2. Stitch using a stretch stitch or serger in a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'll typically use my sewing machine for this step so that I can open the seam allowances in the next step, but as you can see, a serger also works well here. Once all 4 side seams are stitched, turn the inner waistband right side out. Lay both waistbands on your table with the bottom notches aligned at the bottom and making sure the front is laying on top for both waistbands. Then slip the inner waistband into the outer waistband and pin or clip all along the upper edge. If you used your sewing machine for the side seams, you'll simply open up those side seams to pin them together. If you used your serger like I did, press one side seam to the left and the other side seam toward the right. Stitch using a stretch stitch or serger in a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Optionally, you can add a 1/4 inch elastic to the seam allowance at this step. We recommend clear, flat, or rubber elastic for additional support. Once the top edge is stitched, turn the waistband right sides out and line up the bottom raw edges. If you use the serger for your side seams, make sure they lay flat without any twisting all the way to the bottom. Now use a basting stitch, which is the longest straight stitch length on your sewing machine, to baste the 2 raw edges together. Now your waistband is ready to attach to the leggings. And here's how your waistband should look. This is the view of the inner waistband, and you can see the seam is pulled in toward the inner waistband. And here is the view from the outer waistband. If you've chosen the folded waistband option, you'll take both waistbands and lay them on your table with right sides together. Pin or clip along the 2 short side seams. Stitch using a stretch stitch or serger in a 3/8 inch seam allowance. With the side seams stitched, you'll now fold the waistband with wrong sides touching. If you used a sewing machine like I did, you can open up those seams to get a nice flat finish on the inside. Pin the raw edges together along the bottom of the waistband. Now use a basting stitch, which is the longest straight stitch length on your sewing machine, to baste the 2 raw edges together. Now your waistband is ready to attach to the leggings. With right sides together, slip the waistband down into the leggings. Align the center fronts and the center backs. Also, line up the side seams based on the waistband option you chose. Stitch using a stretch stitch or serger and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. A 1-inch hem is included in the pattern. I like to mark 2 inches from the raw edge and then fold the bottom edge up to that 2-inch line, creating a 1-inch hem. Top stitch the hem in place using a zigzag stitch, twin needle, or cover stitch machine. And just like that, you have completed your very own Greenstyle mini flare leggings. Be sure to share your creations over social media using hashtag #GSMiniFlares. We can't wait to see what you made. Until next time, happy sewing from all of us at Greenstyle.